Hello everyone. In the previous tutorial, we had seen how to create a database, and we had created a database called SampleDB. So now in this tutorial, we are going to start creating the tables and start inserting the data into those tables. So before you actually create a table, you need to create a schema. So what is schema? Schema is nothing but I would say a structure in which in how the data is stored inside a database. Okay, so if you have tables related to employees, like employee details and salary department, you can group all those tables into a particular schema called employees. Okay, so schema is nothing but like a structure as to how the data is stored inside a particular database. So first, let's create a schema. Okay, so before you do that, you need to connect to the database that you created. So I'll select the sample DB user as Postgres, and the role I'll select as Postgres and click on OK. Okay. So I'm connected to the database now. So let's start creating a schema in this database. So if you see here in the sample DB, there is only one schema called public. So let's create a schema called employee. Okay. So let's run this query now. Okay, so it says that create schema is successful, and let me refresh it. So if I refresh here, I got the schema here. So now inside the schema, we will have all the options like materialized views, procedure, sequences, table. So we will discuss each of those in the upcoming videos. So for the first thing we need to do is we need to talk about the tables. So tables is where you store the data inside a database. Okay, so tables are grouped under schema, and all the schemas are present inside a particular database. So that's how the hierarchy is in SQL database. Okay, so let's start creating a table now. Let's call this step as create table. Okay, so the command to do is to create a table is create table, and let's give the table name as employee info. And so create table name, and inside this you actually need to give your column name and data type. So let's call the first column as employee ID, and what should I give the data type as? So basically, to get a fair idea about the data types, you can actually refer the PostgreSQL documentation itself. So you can Google for Postgres data types, and it will take you to this page. So it has this as all the PostgreSQL data types. Okay, it has a lot of numeric data types, character data types, date, and JSON and all this stuff. Okay, so you can choose the uh, you know appropriate data type for your requirement. So our employee ID is going to be an integer, so I'm going to take this as int. Okay, so let's go here and take this as int, and the second column we will keep it as employee name, and this is again a character. So basically, let's see what we have for characters. So there is a character varying this is not the right one because it's a fixed length character string. So if you give a length and if you insert a value which is a string which is longer than this, it will throw you an error. So let's select varchar and go ahead with that. So I'll select varchar, and we need to give a length for that. Okay, and so that is your employee name. The next thing, let's call this as department ID. So the department in which the employee belongs, and call it as int again, and age is again an int, and salary, so it's also an integer. Okay, or you can keep it as big int if you wish. Okay, so I think these are enough. So let's run this. So before you actually run this, where do you want to create this table? So basically, we want to create this table inside the schema. So what we will do is we will do create table schema dot table name. So employee dot employee info. So if you don't include this employee dot employee info, it will be created inside the public schema. So I want to create it under the employee. So I'll select employee dot employee info. And so basically that is a syntax of how to create a SQL table. Create table schema name dot table name and your column name and your data type. Okay. So let me select this query and run this. Okay, so it says that the create table is successful. Now I'm going to go here and see here. So if you see here, the employee table, employee info table is created under the schema employee. Okay, so there are columns, and then there are constraints and all that. So we'll discuss what constraints mean as well. So constraints are basically the rules that you set on the data, right? So your age cannot be null. Let's say zero, right? So I mean, it cannot be null. So stuff like that. Like, I mean, employee ID. So let's say this is your primary key. So that is again a constraint. So the constraints are basically the rules that you set. I mean, on your data. So your age cannot be negative. So you can set the rule that this cannot be negative. So that is what a constraint means. So let's see how to define constraint. So actually, what I'll do is I'll drop this table and recreate this table along with the constraints. Okay, so let's drop this table first and recreate it. Okay, so now the table is dropped. Let me see if it is dropped. Yes, so now it is dropped. So now what I'll do is I'll create this. I'll make this employee ID as a primary key, and let's make this age as not null. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make this as primary key, and let's say that like I mean your age cannot be null, right? So this is not null. Okay. Okay, so now let me run this command again. So now it says that is successful. Okay, let me refresh this one. Okay, so now if you see this employee info table, we have the columns, and we also have the constraint saying that employee info, private key is a constraint, right? So that we defined here, a primary key. Okay, so that's how you create a table inside in a SQL database. I mean, the first step is you create a schema and then you create a table, and you that syntax is basically create table and schema name dot table name and then your column name data type, and then you can add constraints as well on your columns. So that's it for this tutorial, and in next video we are going to see how to insert the data into this table that we just created.